Hello everyone, welcome to Unacademy's Let's Crack UPSC CSC English YouTube channel. See, my name is Aravind. Now, the topic that we will be looking today is in the last class we talked about the concept of constitution, how constitution emerged, and what are the different types of constitution. And also, I gave you an overview on how Indian constitution is classified. Now, in this class, we will look at the constitutional developments which took place during British era. So, we will be exclusively looking at the period between 1757 to 1935. Now we will look at in depth what are the constitution developments which the British undertook for governing India. Clear? Now, before going on to the topic itself, let me give you a brief introduction about myself. See, my name is Aravind, and I am a BE mechanical engineer, and I have almost 3 years of teaching in UPSC, and I have coached about around 100,000 students, and I've experienced all stages of UPSC civil services. My specialization subjects include polity, international relations, as well as current affairs. Now, what are the benefits that students will get by subscribing to Unacademy? See, Unacademy is the largest online learning platform in India, which itself provides you with a lot of advantages. One big advantage is it gives you access to top educators in India currently. See, these people, Sudarshan Gujar, Munal Patel, so these are currently the top educators in UPSC field for the past few years. And Unacademy gives you the platform to give access to their videos. So that's the major advantage of subscribing to Unacademy. And also, based on students' request, Unacademy has recently introduced this new type of subscription platform called as Iconic subscription. So currently, Unacademy provides you with two types of subscription. One is Plus subscription. The next one is Iconic subscription. So what are the differences between these two platforms? See, Plus platform concerns itself with only teaching part, whereas in case of Iconic platform, it focuses on mentoring. In Plus subscription platform, it's all about teaching, where top educators in India will congregate in an academy and they will share their knowledge with you. But in case of Iconic subscription platform, apart from the teaching that you will receive, an academy also provides you with mentoring. Clear? UPSC is a very long exam. It requires some laborious preparation and it requires constant guidance. Clear? Now that constant guidance will be provided by an academy people, and these mentors who are mentoring you, these are some of the people who have experienced all stages of UPSC preparation, and these are some of the top people in UPSC field, and some have even cleared UPSC itself. Clear? So these are the advantages of you subscribing to Iconic subscription and the differences between Plus as well as Iconic platforms. Now, as I mentioned in my previous video, how is Iconic different from Plus? The main differences are teaching as well as mentoring. Teaching is all about knowledge, mentoring is all about experience. So, mentors will share their experience of studying for UPSC with you. So, using their experience, so they know all about how, in what areas students will make mistake, because they themselves are prepared for UPSC, right? So, since they themselves are prepared for UPSC, they know when they will where students will make mistakes and what are the solutions for those particular problems. Okay. So now that part you will get from Iconic subscription. Now, how can you subscribe to Iconic platform? So whenever you are subscribing to Unacademy, you will be provided with a choice of two platforms, Plus as well as Iconic. Now, if you wish to join Iconic platform, you can do so by clicking in Iconic platform, and you have to pay some extra money when it comes to Iconic platform. Clear? And you have the choice of selecting this platform for either 1 month, 2 months, or 6 months, or 12 months and 24 months. Now, these are the amount charged by an academy for Plus platform. Now, if you look at this amount and compare it with other offline institutions, the amount charged by an academy is very less compared to other traditional institutions. Okay, it is very less compared to other traditional offline institutions, and also because of this ongoing pandemic crisis, subscribing to an academy makes a lot of sense. And also, If you're using my code AravindV, if you're using my code AravindV, you get 10% offer on your amount that you're paying as well. So for example, if you're subscribing for 12 months platform, you have to pay around 36,000, right? And if you're using my code AravindV, you get 3,600 rupees as offer. So don't forget to use my code AravindV whenever you're subscribing to Unacademy subscription platform. Now that promo has been done with, we will look at what is the agenda for today. Clear. Now the agenda for today clearly includes, first we will look at the rise of East India Company and what are the reasons why East India Company became a political power in India. First, East India Company came into India as a trading power only. But what are the reasons why East India Company became a political power in India? After that, we will look at what are the reasons why East India Company passed the Regulating Act of 1773, and we will look at the Act of 1786, the Charter Act of 1793, the Charter Act of 1833, Charter Act of 1853. Also, we will look at what are the significance of these particular acts. We will also look into that, because if we just read what are the provisions of this particular act, you won't remember stuff. UPSC is a very vast syllabus. Remembering all those important details is very difficult. One such trick to remember all those details is to remember how this particular thing happened and what are the reasons why this particular thing happened. Yeah, and what are the advantages of this particular provision. So if you read along with those things, remembering stuff in UPSC is very easy. Now, if you're not doing that in-depth analysis, trust me, how much harder you try, you cannot remember information very easily. Okay, so that's why analyzing in-depth is very important when it comes to UPSC preparation. Now, after that, we look at Queen's Proclamation of 1858, Indian Council Act of 1861, and then Indian Council Act of 1892, 1909, 1919, and Government of India Act 1935. So we will end our class in Government of India Act 1935. Also, even in this acts passed by British Parliament, we will look at in depth how this acts came into place, what are the significant changes introduced by this particular act, all those things we will look into this. Look in this particular class. Now we will go to the first topic of today: the rise of English East India Company. Yeah. Now, during 1600s, 1500s as well as 1600s, there were two countries who dominated trade with East Asia. Those two countries include Portugal as well as Spain. Now, these two countries were the dominant naval forces in East Asia, and they carried out extensive trade relations with these East Asian countries. Now, because of that, these two countries became very rich. Yeah. Because of the trade with East Asia, these two countries, the merchants in these two countries became very rich. They amassed huge amounts of profits. There are a number of examples like Vasco da Gama coming into India, and he exploited number of Indian merchants, and he exploited a large number of profits from India. Now, the information about Portuguese as well as Spain amassing huge wealth in East Asia caught the imagination of English merchants as well. The vast amount of profits that these two people are getting caught the imagination of English merchants as well. Now, these English merchants also wanted to trade with East Asia. Now, at that time, during 1600s, large amount of wealth was with Asian countries. World GDP was dominated by East Asian countries, even though militarily Western countries were far superior. Most of the wealth was concentrated in Asian countries. So English merchants also wanted to take part in the sharing of East Asian wealth. For this purpose, some prominent merchants held a meeting in London. After great deliberation, they petitioned to Queen of England to incorporate these merchants into a company for carrying out trade with Indies. Clear. Now these merchants, they came together. They came together and they formed a body. Clear. And this body took deliberations, and this body put petitions to Queen of England. Clear. saying that they have to incorporate this particular body into a separate company. Now this separate company will trade with East Asia. So that's the plan was English merchants. Now Queen of England issued a royal charter. She issued a royal charter in 1600, incorporating this body into English East India Company. Clear? Queen of England, after receiving petition from prominent merchants in Britain, she issued royal charter in 1600, incorporating this body into East India Company. Okay. Now, East India Company, what type of body is it? See, East India Company is a private limited body. Clear? That is, it is a body which is controlled by private individuals, and it has been established as joint stock company. Yeah, it has been established as a joint stock company. Now, what is the meaning of this particular word, joint stock company? Which means that large number of people, clear, number of merchants in England will come together and they will invest in this East India Company. Clear, number of people will come together. Some 500 people came together. They congregated their wealth. They shared their wealth to East India Company so that this East India Company can trade with East Asia. Clear? Now, these people who have donated to East India Company, who have invested in East India Company, they have voting rights. Clear? They have, for one person, they have one vote. Now, these people who have who have invested in East India Company, they will vote. They will vote for a body called as Court of Directors. Clear? Now, these people who have bought shares in English East India Company, they will vote for a body called as Court of Directors. Now, this Court of Directors is responsible for managing English East India Company. Clear? Now, this Court of Directors, then the strength of Court of Directors will also be decided by the people who are investing in East India Company. This Court of Directors will manage the affairs of English East India Company. So that's how this body worked right after the establishment of East India Company. Clear? I hope this part is clear, right? How East India Company has been established. Now, if you look at the period between 1600 to 1765, the English East India Company were primarily traders. Now, between this period, English East India Company, they were primarily traders because they thought that it is not warranted from English East India Company to involve themselves in political affairs, as they thought that involving in political affairs will eat into their profits. So that's why they were primarily traders during this period. They did not concern themselves with any sort of amassing political power. They were primarily only traders. Despite occasional up and downs between English and native rulers, the company flourished till 1765. Now, after 1765, it threw off the mask of traders. English East India Company threw off the mask of traders and appeared in the true grab of rulers. So, after 1765 only, English East India Company made themselves as rulers of India. Until then, they were primarily only traders. Now, importantly, company derived its authority not only from British Crown and Parliament in England, but also from Mughal Emperor as well as other native rulers of India. Now, this point is very important. Now, this English East India Company, they not only received royal sermons from Queen of England as well as British Parliament, they also received patronage from Mughal emperors as well as other native rulers in India. Clear? Now, these native rulers of India, they thought that since this English East India Company, by trading with India, they are paying huge amounts of taxes to India. They are bringing wealth to India. They are yet to realize the dangers of English East India Company. So they thought that since our prosperity is increasing, we might as well allow trade with English East India Company. So they also received patronage from Mughal emperors as well as other native rulers of India. Now, during this period, company extended their trading influence into Bombay, Calcutta, as well as Madras. The English East India Company extended their trade influence into these three important regions of Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras. Now, when their trade positions in these three areas came threatened only they became political power. Only when their trade relations in Calcutta became threatened, they entered into war with Bengal government at the time, into Battle of Plassey as well as Battle of Buxar. Clear? Until 1765, they were primarily traders. Only after 1765, they became political rulers of India. Now that part, I hope that part is clear to you. Now, after 1765, after the Battle of Plassey, English East India Company established a type of government called as double government in Bengal. Now, what is this double government? Okay. See, after Battle of Plassey in 1757, the Nawab of Bengal was reduced to a mere non-entity, and real political power was passed into the hands of company. Yeah, now, after this battle, Nawab of Bengal became a mere non-entity. His political power was almost completely dismantled. After that, the real power, even though the Nawab was the titular head of Bengal, the real power was actually passed on to the company. So, how this real power was transformed into the company? See, if you want to rule any land, if you want to rule any land, three things are very important. One is political power. One is political power. The next one is social capital, and then the next last one is financial might. So these things are very important for ruling any country. Now, these two things are, even though they are very important, political as well as social power is dependent on their financial might. So, whichever body is controlling financial might of a particular region, they are the true rulers of. They are the true rulers of political as well as social rights. So, after 1757, Nawab was given with political as well as social rights, but he was completely taken out of his financial powers. So, even though Nawab was the actual ruler of Bengal, but the real power was vested with English East India Company. Okay. Now, after this period, the servants started abusing their authority and began to amass huge fortunes at the cost of natives. See, this English East India Company. What is the purpose of? What is the primary motive? East India Company's primary motive is profits. Clear. So, right from 1600 to 1765, they operated with profit as their motive. So, whenever they are operating with profit as their motive, this group of individuals will obviously be corrupt. Clear? If I am establishing my life with only profit as my motive, what will I do? I will amass wealth at any cost. I will disregard rights of other people, and by disregarding those rights, I will amass huge amounts of wealth. Similarly, East India Company servants, when they started to operate from profit motive, they began to amass huge types of wealth. Now, after 1765, now these very individuals were given the power of financial powers. So, what will they do? These individuals started abusing that power and they plundered India like anything. At the cost of Indian merchants and Indian natives, Indian agriculturists, they plundered all the wealth of Indian natives. Yeah, so that's one significant result of dual government in Bengal. Now, the grant of Diwani was in fact meaningless as it was made by an emperor who did not possess any empire. Like this Nawab, even though he was the titular head of Bengal, he did not have any power. Almost all powers was controlled by English East India Company. So even the grant of Diwani rights by Nawab to Bengal is just an eyewash because the actual power is with East India Company, not with the Nawab. The Diwani was in fact a fiction which Clive conjured up to legalize and regularize the position of company as the de facto power in the country without, however, assuming the responsibilities of government. Clear? So, by granting of Diwani rights to English East India Company, they get to amass all the profits of that particular country without spending any money on the people concerned. Yeah. So English East India Company is not given with any responsibility for the welfare of the people, but they are taking away all our wealth. So that's the brilliant advantage of having dual government in Bengal. Now, what are the reasons why they were hesitant to assume any responsibility for government of India? One, they thought that it will eat into their profits if they were to concern themselves with political administration of India, and also they thought that they are They are new to this particular land and they don't know the customs as well as ways to manage this particular land. So that's why they did not concern themselves with administration of India at the time of establishment of dual government. The next one is acquisition of Nizamat. Let me look into that. The slides are not full screen. Okay, whatever. Let's move on to the topic. See, after the establishment of double government, English East India Company also acquired Nizamat powers. See, there are two types of powers in Mughal period. Those two types of power include Diwani power, Diwani rights as well as Nizamat rights. So these are the two powers that was there during Mughal period. Now, the Diwani power was concerned with financial, Diwani rights concerned with financial rule, Nizamat rights concerned with administration. Clear? So these are the two powers that was there during Mughal period. Now, the grant of Diwani enabled the company to become Diwan, that is the collector of revenues in the provinces of Bengal, Bihar as well as Odisha. Now, this particular information can be asked in UPSC prelims. Okay. The Diwani rights was granted to East India Company in which of these provinces? Bengal, Bihar as well as Odisha, Madras, Bengal, Bombay. Based on that, they can ask questions in UPSC prelims. So remember this particular detail. And they also assume the responsibility of civil justice. Now, if you look at what are the reasons why company assume the responsibility of civil justice? See, they concern themselves with Diwani rights, right? So they are collecting revenues. So whenever they are collecting rights, obviously there will be some sort of dispute between English East India Company as well as other Indian merchants. So there will be sort of dispute between them. Now, who will settle this dispute? This dispute will be settled by civil justice system. So that's why they assume the responsibility of only civil justice, not criminal justice, because they wanted to influence the decisions of civil justice administration, not criminal justice administration. Clear? So that's the reason why they assume the powers of civil justice. Now, during this period, Nizamat was still vested with Nawab of Bengal. Now, in February 1765, after Mir Jafar died and his son Nara Najib Udawla entered into a treaty with company. By this treaty, Nizamat functions were also transferred to the company in lieu of sum of 43 lakh rupees annually. Clear? Now, after this treaty, Nizamat rights was also transferred to the company. That is administration of Bengal, Bihar as well as Orissa. Beyond transferring of administrative powers, he also has to pay 43 lakh rupees annually. Imagine the cruelty of this particular move. Nawab doesn't have any financial powers whatsoever, but still he has to pay around 23 lakhs annually. Like, Nizam doesn't have any, so Nawab doesn't have any financial powers. He doesn't have any means of revenue. Even though he doesn't have any means of revenue, all his powers are taken away. He still has to pay 43 lakh rupees. Yeah. So this shows that the primary motive with respect to English East India Company is profit motive, nothing else. Clear? It is thus evident by 1765 that the company combined itself in both Diwani as well as Nizamat functions, and the Nawab went into the background. Now, from this period onwards, from 1765 onwards, Nawab went into the background. The real power went to English East India Company. Certain practical difficulties, however, prevented Britishers from shouldering directly the burden of administration. Hence, the Nawab and his government were allowed to carry on administration and keep up the responsibility. So, even though all the powers were transferred to East India Company, still Nawab was allowed to maintain his position and to administer the particular land, but all the decisions taken by him were advised with English East India Company. He doesn't have any autonomous powers. Almost all his decisions were taken by East India Company, but the responsibility is given to him. Then, if anything goes wrong, that responsibility is given to him, but all those decisions are taken by English East India Company. Now, this double system of government and innovation of the 60s of 18th century came into existence. It entrusted power and influence to the company, whereas responsibility to the Nawab of Bengal. Okay. The power and influence was given to East India Company, but the responsibility was given to the Nawab of Bengal. Excuse me. Now let's move on to the class itself. So, how double government of Bengal worked? Working of double government of Bengal during 1765 to 1772. Now, such an illogical as well as impolitic division leading to separation of power from responsibility made confusion more confounded and corruption more corrupt. Now, this division of responsibility between Nawab as well as East India Company, it confused a lot of people. Since it confused a lot of people, it creates a lot of vague sense of administration. A lot of decisions were very vague in nature. So, if a lot of decisions taken were very vague in nature, what will happen? What will happen? The people who have the real power, that is, servants who are working in East India Company, they will gain more power. Since they gained more power, what will they do? Using that additional power that has been vested with them, they will plunder like anything. So they became very corrupt. Like, they disregarded the profit nature of East India Company and they started working for themselves. They started amassing wealth for themselves, not for the company concerned. So that's why this line has been put out. This made corrupt people more corrupt, and it also resulted in dwindling fortunes of companies' income. Since these people, company servants, became very corrupt in nature, it resulted in dwindling of company's fortune. So the company was soon finding itself in a financially handicapped position. Like, so even the period between 1600 to 1775, 1765, company was amassing huge amounts of profit. From period of 1765 to 1772, the company found itself in a position where their profits were decreasing year on year. And also, Indian industries suffered a great setback during this period. Now, because of increased corruption in this period, Indian industries suffered a great setback because a lot of English East India Company servers started demanding briberies from Indian merchants. So, as a result of that, Indian industries suffered a great setback. Also, Indian merchants failed to compete with British traders. So, a lot of advantages was given to British traders. So, whenever Indian traders wanted to trade with other countries, high amounts of custom duties was imposed on Indian traders, but very less was imposed on British traders. Clear. So, in a way, this working of dual government worked in the advantage of British traders compared to Indian merchants. So, Indian merchants suffered a large amounts of setbacks, and also dual government also led to complete breakdown of native judiciary. As I mentioned before, while they were assuming Diwani rights, what did company people do? They also assumed the responsibility of administering civil justice. So, since they assumed the responsibility of administering civil justice, what company servants did is that to work judicial system into their favor, company servants frequently intervened into the judicial administration and even overawed Nawab's employees for their illicit gain. So, whenever there is a case which, if it appears that this case will go against the benefits of English servants, what they will do is they will immediately interfere into the judicial process. They will push the judgment in such a way that it works in their favor. Clear? So that's the reason why they assume the responsibility of administering civil justice, not criminal justice, because if they want to administer criminal justice, they have to spend some money, right? And if they are spending money, it will clearly eat into their profits. That's why they assume the responsibility only for administering civil justice, not criminal justice. Now the next one is Regulating Act of 1773. Let me change the. Okay, here also wait. Just give me some few seconds to change this. I don't know what happened since I'm opening this PowerPoint online. Maybe that's the reason all this font has been taken out of context. So now, because of look here, because of all the problems in the working of double government, companies' profits dwindled. Now, whenever East India companies' profits is decreasing, what will they do? They want to arrest this decreasing trend. So, to prevent their profits from going down, British Parliament passed one legislation called as Regulating Act of 1773. Clear? To prevent companies' fortunes from decreasing, Regulating Act of 1773 was passed. Now, why do you think? Now, what is the reason British Parliament is passing laws concerned with East India Company? See, this East India Company was granted monopoly to trade with East Asia. This East India Company was granted monopoly to trade with East Asia. Now, to preserve this monopoly status, East India Company paid certain annual payments to Crown of England. They paid some annual payments to Crown of England. So as the revenue of East India Company decreased, this annual payments to Crown of England also decreased. Now at that time there was a brewing war between English as well as France. There was a brewing war between English as well as France. Now, because of this brewing war between these two countries, British Parliament wanted to make sure that these annual payments from English East India Company is is very high, and it is increasing year on year, not decreasing. So, to prevent this decreasing trend, British Parliament intervened and they passed certain regulations for the well administration of English East India Company. Now, this British Parliament passed the Regulating Act of 1773, the first major measure calculated to remove the evils inherent in the constitution of the company in England and also to improve the tone of its administration in India through parliamentary control. Clear? Before this Regulating Act of 1773, East India Company had no oversight. There was no particular body which was controlling the affairs of East India Company. Now, because of this less oversight, English East India Company started to amass, the people inside East India Company started to amass vast amounts of wealth without disregarding the nature of East India Company. Like, so, to improve the tone of this administration, British Parliament wanted to intervene so that they can exercise parliamentary control over East India Company. Also, this act ensured a type of direct parliamentary control over Court of Directors. As I mentioned before, East India Company is a company which is controlled by a body called as Court of Directors. Now, this Court of Directors was influenced by British Parliament. Clear? So that's the reason why this particular Regulating Act of 1773 was passed. Also, what are the provisions of this particular act? Now, this act provided uh, following five remedial measures for functioning of East India Company. According to this particular act, a new executive for the government of Presidency of Bengal was established. Yeah. For the presidency of Bengal, a new executive was appointed. Now, this new executive was called as Governor General. This new executive was called as Governor General of India. a new relationship between Presidency of Bengal and those of Madras and Bombay was established. Now, this Governor General of Calcutta was called as Governor General of India. Now, under this Governor General of India, Governor General of Bombay as well as Governor General of Madras has to work. Okay. Now, these two Governor Generals came under the direct control of Governor General of India. Okay. So this is a new relationship that was established between Governor General of India as well as Governor General of Bombay as well as Madras, and also it set up Supreme Court of India at Calcutta. It also set up Supreme Court at Calcutta, and it also reformed civil service for the administration of India, and a new procedure for making of regulation was also passed. Clear? Since company was controlling huge amounts of territories, company also has to pass certain laws for the welfare of people. Now, for that purpose, a new procedure for making of regulation was also passed. Now, by according to this new procedure, both Governor General of Bengal as well as Governor General of Bombay and Madras, they can pass regulations for the well-being of company. Yeah, so these are the new regulations that was passed in Regulating Act of 1773. Wait here. What is the constitutional importance of Regulating Act of 1773? See, for the very first time, it was recognized that English East India Company was not just a mere commercial body. It made crystal clear that the body was also a type of political organization whose functions were also political in nature. So, for the very first time, some political function was given to East India Company, and it was also the first of series of parliamentary enactments which subjected to some extent control of Indian affairs in the hands of Parliament. So this was the first act wherein British Parliament tries to control the affairs of East India Company more and more. So this was the first type of first enactment which was done for that purpose. The Act also considerably curtailed the patronage of company by making its appointments the Governor General and his councillor, Chief Justice and other judges. In future also such nominations were also subject to ratification of Crown. So if they want to make any important appointments to English East India Company, like Governor General, like persons to Court of Directors, as well as judges to Supreme Court of India, all these appointments has to be ratified by Crown. Okay. So in a way, British Parliament is trying to exert their control on the affairs of English East India Company. The act also is deemed significant because it was for the first of measure which enabled European government to assume responsibility for governing territories outside of Europe. So for the first time, European government is assuming responsibilities for governing territories outside of Europe. So if there can be a prelims question that can be asked on this particular fact, which is the first country to govern political functions on countries outside of Europe? The answer is UK. Clear? And also, the Act put an end to scandalous misrule as well as corruption which was prevalent amongst the servants of company. No person in Indian service was henceforth to fulfill his coffers with alluring presence of natives or amass huge fortunes. Clear? By making appointments to East India Company subject to ratification of the Crown, British Parliament made sure that right people with right motive was appointed to East India Company. People who can overlook the well-being of East India Company were appointed. Because of it, corruption in East India Company was greatly reduced. So these are the advantages of this is the constitutional importance of Regulating Act of 1773. Clear? Now, right from 1773, the Charter for East India Company was renewed for a period of 20 years. Clear? The Charter of East India Company to trade with East Asia was renewed for around 20 years. So that's why if you look at various acts of British Parliament, they will be passed in a period of 20 years. Regulating Act of 1773, Regulating Act of 1793, Charter Act of 1813, Charter Act of 1833, Charter Act of 1853. If you look at all these acts passed by British Parliament for well-being of India, well-being of East India Company, all these acts are passed in an interval of 20 years. Now, what is the reasons why they have been passed in an interval of 20 years? Because British Parliament will renew the Charter of East India Company. Their monopoly status will be renewed only for 20 years. Now, beyond these 20 years, it requires subsequent approval from Parliament. So that's why all these Charter Acts was passed in the interval of 20 years. Now, keep that in mind. Now, the next one is the Act of 1786. Now, this act was very short and it was very significant. Now, it was passed chiefly at the insistence of Lord Cornwallis, who succeeded Warren Hastings. Now, according to it, the Governor General was empowered to override the majority of his own council. It thus removed a serious defect of regulating act and made Governor General more authoritative. As I mentioned before, in regulating act, Governor General was given with Executive Council. Now, this Executive Council was responsible for making laws as well as regulations, and then this Executive Council was also responsible for certain executive functions as well. Clear. Now, this if there is any disagreement between Governor General as well as Executive Council in regulating act, there was no provision to resolve this particular dispute. Now, as a result of that, there was a lot of confusion that was arising between Governor General as well as his Executive Council. Now, to solve this problem, this Act of 1786 was passed. Now, by this Act of 1786, Governor General can override his Executive Council. So, in a way, it made Governor General more authoritative. And the next one is the Charter Act of 1793. Now, this act made no important change in the position of then existing. It affirmed that the territorial possessions and exclusive privileges of trade enjoyed by the company would continue for a further period of 20 years. It also provided for the payment of salaries of members and staffs of Board of Control out of Indian revenues. Yeah. Now, before Court of Directors, their revenue was paid from British coffers. Now, these salaries of Court of Directors of India were paid from revenue that is arising out of India. So, this placed responsibility on Court of Directors to increase their revenue from Indian sources. Yeah. Now, moving on. The next significant act that was passed by British Parliament was the Charter Act of 1813. Now, although this act renewed the charter for a further period of 20 years, it took away the exclusive privilege of company to trade in India. Clear? From 1600 to 1813, East India Company enjoyed monopoly status. Yeah, a company enjoyed monopoly status. They had the exclusive right of trading in India. Now, by this Charter Act of 1813, this monopoly was completely demolished except for tea trade. Except for tea trade, all the other subjects under all other trade subjects was completely thrown out to competition. Now, this Indian trade was thrown open to all British subjects except tea, in which company was allowed to retain monopoly. The Act also provided for maintenance of separate accounts for commercial as well as political activities by the company. See here, right from 1773, company assumed some political responsibilities. Now, from 1773 to 1813, company also amassed large amounts of territories in India. Since they amass large amounts of territories in India, they require certain amount. There is a certain requirement of money that is to be spent on political administration. So that's why, in lieu of, they thought that this political administration necessitated a lot of money. So that's why this act forced East India Company to keep separate accounts of commercial as well as political activities. It confirmed the patronage of Court of Directors subject to the approval of Crown in case of fire appointments and Board of Control in case of certain others. The British Parliament also started exercising a lot more control on Court of Directors. It also limited the number of troops the company was allowed to maintain in India at its own expenses. Clear? Now, before, if East India Company was to maintain troops in India, now the salary of these troops was paid out of money received from England. Now, right now, a cap was placed on number of troops which can be maintained in India based on revenue out of England. If a company wants to increase their number of troops, they can do so only by means of revenue obtaining from Indian sources. They cannot do so by means of revenue generated from England. And finally, it allowed British subjects to go to India either as traders or as missionaries, and also to settle down there as under a system of licenses. Okay. Now, this act allowed British citizens to settle to go to India and settle there. Now, if they want to go to India, these British citizen has to obtain license from British Parliament. Clear? After obtaining this license, these people are allowed to go to India and settle there. This act thus marks the beginning of ecclesiastical establishment in India. Now, what is the meaning of this word ecclesiastical establishment of India? Now, since these British subjects were allowed to go and settle in India, what it led to is number of Christian missionaries. They started to come to India and settle here. Okay? So they started preaching Christianity in India. This preaching of Christianity and establishment of schools which preach this, Christianity is called as ecclesiastical affairs. So this act marked the beginning of ecclesiastical affairs in India. Now, for the first time, it also provided for setting apart of 1 lakh rupees every year for the revival of improvement of literature as well as education of learned natives in India and for the introduction and promotion of knowledge, sciences among inhabitants. So, for the very first time, the government is assuming the responsibility of other welfare subjects like education. And apart from political administration, for the very first time, welfare subjects were also was also taken by East India Company. For that purpose, rupees 1 lakh was set aside. Okay. Now, what is the importance of this particular act? See, the Act of 1813 is not much of constitutional importance like its predecessor, but it is also not any devoid of its significance altogether. Firstly, it abolished the monopoly of companies trade in India except tea. Like, so the monopoly status of company was abolished except tea. It resulted in the rise of British trade from 13 million pounds to 100 million pounds. Now, this abolition of monopoly trade resulted in free trade between Britain as well as India. Now, this free trade between these two countries resulted in increased revenue from the tune of 13 million pounds to 100 million pounds. Now, because of this increased revenue, Britain was able to successfully defeat France during Napoleonic Wars. Not only that, Britain was able to survive Napoleonic continental blockade during this period because Britain was trading with India. So that's the reason. Because of the wealth they got from India, Britain was able to successfully defeat France during England Napoleonic Wars. Yeah, so if you look at history, there is a lot of connections between happenings in India as well as happenings around the world. Clear? Establishment of Indian National Congress. It has some connection with world events. Establishment of Communist Party of India. It has some inspiration from outside forces in the world. So in history, if you look at the connection between events, there is certainly a connection between world events and events happening in India. Clear? Now, with the free flow of English capital as well as enterprise in India, an era of exploitation ushered in. The British factories eclipsed Indian industries, and British merchants were, with their cheaper as well as superior goods, outstood Indian fellow workers. Now, this Free Trade Act meant that a lot of English goods, a lot of superior as well as cheap English goods was dumped in Indian market, like how China is doing in India right now. British was doing that in 1800s. They're cheap as well as superior goods because these goods manufactured by Britain was machine manufactured. So they will be obviously superior as well as they will be mass produced. They will be very cheap compared to products produced by Indian merchants. Because of this advantage, they dumped these products in Indian markets. Now, because of this, Indian merchants' profits was completely destroyed. Clear. Now, this act also paved way for the ways of spreading Christianity in India. English missionaries, by establishing missionary schools and colleges at various places in India, succeeded in influencing illiterate Indians and making them embrace Christianity. Clear. This Christian missionaries, they started to come to India because of this act allowed British citizens to settle down in India. These people came to India. They set up number of schools, colleges, as well as missionaries in India. Now these missionaries started to convert Indians into Christianity owing to their low educational status. Since these people are devoid of any sort of knowledge, they start to convert these people into Christianity. Also, this act is quite significant because its preamble it asserted the undoubted sovereignty of Crown of United Kingdom of India over territories of Company. Clear. So it clearly asserted that East India Company's territories was clearly controlled by Crown of England, but clear East India Company is not an independent body. All the territories of English East India Company was controlled by Crown of England. Clear. So for the first time, the concept of preamble was introduced in English constitutional developments. Clear. So if you look at, there is a question in prelims. When was the first time preamble was introduced in? See, the next topic that we will be looking is the Charter Act of 1833. See, after in Charter Act of 1813, as I mentioned before, there was a provision that after 20 years, the charter will be renewed for the Charter of East India Company has to be renewed. Now, there were during the passing of this Charter Act of 1833, there were two prominent happenings that happened both in India as well as in England. See, in India, the policy of intervention and territorial aggression pursued by Wellesley as well as Hastings added enormously to the territories of company and also the consequent difficulties in administration. During this period, number of new territories were added to East India Company like Mysore, Maratha territories. All these territories were added during this period. Now, these new territories added to complexities of administration because the administration of East India Company at the time was not well equipped to deal with all these new territories. So that's why this Charter Act of 1833 was very necessary for passing. And also in England, parliamentary reforms was brought in. Now, during this parliamentary reforms, a reformed House of Commons was elected. Now, in this reformed House of Commons, number of new MPs were elected. Now, these new MPs, most of them subscribe to an ideology called as liberalism. Now, what is the idea of liberalism? What are the core tenets of liberalism? They believed in the concept of free trade. They believed in the concept of rule of law. So these are the basic tenets of liberalism. Now there are two important peoples in this parliament who are very important for when it comes to India. These two important people are Lord Macaulay as well as James Mill. Now any political science optional students will immediately recognize this person James Mill. James Mill he was responsible for he is one of the proponents of early liberalism in political science thought. He was also responsible in a way for passing of Charter Act of 1833. Now these two people became very prominent. Now these two people started to assert more influence on British Parliament with regards to the management of affairs of English East India Company. Clear. Now, as a result of this act, the last traces of commercial monopoly which the company enjoyed was abolished. Which means that company enjoyed one monopoly only in tea sector. That monopoly was also abolished. So all restriction with respect to British trade with India was completely thrown out to competition. And also all restrictions to European immigration in India was also removed. So even without license, Europeans can come and settle into India. Clear? Now this unhindered flow of Europeans in India made some reform to Indian law imperative. Clear? Now this unhindered law, number of as a result of this unrestricted access to European immigration, number of British people came and settled in India. Clear? So if there is a dispute between British people as well as Indian people, now laws that governs Indian people as well as British people are completely different. We have different Indian people have different sets of law as well as British people have different sets of law. Now, if we want to establish a relationship between these two people, we require such serious overhaul in judicial administration. Okay. Now, for that purpose, law commission was established by British Parliament. Clear. but also the powers exercised by Governor General in Council were also not sufficient to meet this situation. Powers which was exercised by Governor General Council was also not sufficient to meet this situation. Accordingly, Governor General in Council was empowered to make laws, regulations for all persons as well as courts in India. So Governor General was given the power to make laws throughout India as well as for laws throughout in courts throughout India. Further, a law commission was appointed on the recommendation of Macaulay for codification of law which were already in existence. For streamlining the judicial administration between British people as well as Indian people, there should be some codification of Indian laws, right? Without codifying those laws, we cannot establish what will constitute as Indian laws. So, for that purpose, law commission was established by Lord Macaulay. Now, this law commission codified Indian laws into CRPC as well as Civil Procedure Code. Clear? Criminal laws was codified into CRPC, civil laws were codified into Civil Procedure Code. So, thus, Charter Act of 1833 marked the first instance where Britain tried to codify Indian laws. So, from then onwards, Law Commission was regularly appointed. Clear? Now, the Council's lawmaking would override the authority of Governor General of Madras as well as Bombay, who were at the same time deprived of their independent powers of lawmaking. Clear? So, Governor General of Bengal, who is also called as Governor General of India, can override Governor General of Bengal as well as Madras, who were already deprived of their independent lawmaking authority. So, in a way, Charter Act of 1833 made India more centralized. Clear? Now, and this act this act allowed for appointment of Indians in public services. So, mind you, when I mention public services, it does not include civil services. Still, civil services was only restricted to British persons, not for Indians. It allowed for appointment of Indians in low level British employment like clerks, peons, all for all these positions. It allowed for employment of Indians into public services, not for civil services. Uh, this act also directed Governor General in Council to take steps both for amelioration of slaves in India and to propose measures for abolition of slavery throughout India. So this act mandated Governor General for abolition of slavery and also for about taking steps for abolition of slavery throughout India. So even before abolition of slavery in USA, slavery was steps to take abolish slavery was taken in India. Now, provision was made under the Act for training of civil servants at Companies College in Haileybury and also regulated admissions to that particular college. So, before that, if a person wants to be, if a British citizen wants to become civil servant, the process of admission was very vague. Yeah, so, since it was very vague, a lot of people who are favorable to English East India Company Court of Directors was selected as Indian civil servants. But right now, after Charter Act of 1833, this process was regulated so that only deserved people went into the college admissions. Finally, a new presidency was created under the act, namely Presidency of Agra. See, before this Charter Act, there were three presidencies: Presidency of Bengal, Presidency of Bombay, and then Presidency of Madras. Now, this Bombay as well as Madras came under the administrative control of Bengal. Now, this third type of presidency which was established called as Agra. Clear? This act established a new type of presidency called as Agra. Now, while the regulating act has initiated the process of centralization by creating the office of Governor General, the Act of 1883 marked the culmination of that process by establishing complete mastery of Governor General in Council over the entire British administration. So, Governor General of Bengal was he enjoyed almost all powers with respect to entire administration of India. So, that thus marked the over centralization of Indian administration during British era. So, from 1833 to 1861, the Indian Council Act was passed. British law was under the tight grip of highly centralized system of administration, which had its impact on the character of British government in India until the disappearance in 1947. So, right from Charter Act of 1833 to independence to 1947, this over centralization can be felt throughout British administration. Yeah. Now, what is the significance of this particular act? Now, what is the significance of this Sorry there. What is the significance of this particular act? Now, the act, by abolishing completely the company's monopoly of free trade and trade with China, removed one of the glaring defects of Indian administration, that is, Union of Traders Sovereign. The company ceased to be a commercial body. So before that, it was very confusing. Company was a political body as well as commercial body. Now, this act demolished this glaring fact that company is only a political body, not a commercial body. So right from Charter Act of 1833, the company was only political body, not a commercial body. Till its abolition in 1858, the company was vested with political functions only, not with commercial functions. Now, the Act unsettled for the first time the doors of British India to British subjects of European birth. They were entitled to live in country, even occupy land. This free ingress of Europeans in India promoted their general improvement and prosperity. A few critics, however, opined that mass exodus of Europeans in India resulted in exploitation of Indian people who were customers for English goods. Like when mass European people came into India they accommodated in India into British customs as well as practices. So they made Indians to buy more English goods. So they familiarized Indians with their English customs. Based on that, Indians wanted to purchase more English goods so that British companies in England profited because of that. This act also constituted law commission with Macaulay as its first president. Indian Penal Code and its codes of civil as well as criminal procedure are the outcomes of efforts of this commission, headed as it was an embodiment of legal acumen and political sagacity. So, for the first time, Indian laws was codified into Indian Penal Code, and civil as well as criminal acts was codified into civil as well as criminal procedure of India. Clear? Now, for the first time, it introduced uniformities in the laws of government by establishing legislative supremacy of central government and doing away with diversities in laws of different presidencies. Now, before Charter Act of 1833, different presidencies followed different types of laws. So, it created a lot of confusion. Now, because of this highly centralized nature of Charter Act of 1833, this diversity was done away with. Okay. So almost all laws passed by Governor General Legislative Council was applicable throughout India uniformly without any diversity. Clear? So it eradicated the anomalies and conflicts in jurisdiction of various courts. So, for example, before Charter Act of 1813, a particular court in Madras will treat a case differently, and court in Bombay will treat a particular case differently. Now, these anomalies were solved by Charter Act of 1833 because the laws passed by Governor General of India has to be applied uniformly throughout territories of India. Okay. So the next act after the Charter Act of 1833 passed was Charter Act of 1853. See, the most significant provision of Charter Act of 1853 was that did not renew the charter for a specific period. So that's the most significant provision of this Charter Act. Now the Act reduced the number of directors from 18 from 24. The directors of Court of Directors, right? So the number of Court of Directors was reduced from 24 to 18. So it also provided that 6 of them will be appointed by Crown. So out of this 18, only 12 will be voted by shareholders. Only 12 will be voted by shareholders. The rest 6 will be appointed by Crown. Clear? Now, it also provided for the enlargement of Executive Council of Governor General to cope with its external functions in lawmaking. Okay. Now, the civil service of India was also thrown open to competition. So, for the first time, Indian civil services was thrown open to competition for both Britain as well as Indian subjects. But Indian subjects has to go to England and write this particular exam. A year later, by means of new enactment, the Act of 1854, Parliament provided for appointment of chief commissioners to head minor provinces in India. So, apart from major presidencies, there were certain minor territories which was controlled by British India. Now, for these minor provinces, they appointed a new person called as chief commissioner to head these particular provinces. Okay. So now, what is the constitutional importance of this act? So the fact that company's charter was not renewed for any definitive period made it crystal clear that company's end was fast approaching. So if you look at previous act, company's charter was renewed for around 20 years. Now, this act did not renew company's charter for any specific period. So, it clearly mentioned that the company's rule is fast approaching. Company's end is fast approaching. Also, the executive council was enlarged not only for the purpose of legislation, but in the words of Arthur Montfort report, the legislation was for the very first time treated as a special function of government requiring special machinery and special process. So a lot of apparatus was put into place for legislative functions of Governor General's Council. Clear? And importantly, it did not associate any Indians with legislative body, whereas its English members were not aware of local conditions. Clear? So laws made by English persons who are in Governor General's Council were only Englishmen, but these Englishmen were not aware of local condition. Now, this exclusion of Indians aggravated the discontent and proved to be one of the most important reasons for the outbreak of mutiny of 1857. Clear. So, after the Charter Act of 1853, one of the major provisions in Charter Act of 1853 was Indians was not appointed in Governor General's Legislative Council. Since Indians was not included in their legislative council, this created a lot of discontent among Indian people. This also was one of the reasons for outbreak of 1857 mutiny. Clear? See, the next act that was passed by British Parliament was Act for the Better Government of India 1858. Now, what are the causes of enactment for this particular Act 1858? Now, the immediate cause of its enactment was, of course, mutiny. Now, since the mutiny of 1857 broke out, British Parliament wanted to know why this mutiny broke out, and to rectify those problems which caused this revolt of 1857. They wanted to rectify all those defects. That's why they passed this Government Act of 1858. Now, the system of checks and balances between British Parliament as well as English East India Company created a lot of confusion, and it made the working of government very slow in nature. Clear? And it took a lot of considerable amount of time as well as work to pass any meaningful legislation. For example, as I mentioned before, British Parliament started to exercise control over East India Company. So any action taken by East India Company was to be approved by British Parliament. Any major action taken by East India Company has to be approved by British Parliament. So this act of checks and balances created a lot of time. So any decision taken by East India Company has to be approved by British Parliament. So it took a lot of time to take any meaningful decision. So it made the administration of India very slow as well as laborious. And also, East India Company was no longer exercising any trading function or any effective political powers. The last vestige of monopoly of trade was taken away from 1833. So there was no need to keep East India Company just for the sake of having political control. Clear? So to resolve all these problems, Act of Better Government of 1858 was passed. Wait here, I'll solve this problem. Now, previously, we looked at what are the reasons why Government of India Act 1858 was passed. Now, we look at what are all the provisions of this particular act. See, the Government of India Act was passed. The Government of India was passed on the hands of English East India Company to Crown of England. Clear. Now, the administration of India was passed from East India Company to Crown of England. This is the most important provision with respect to Government of India Act 1858. And importantly, the name of Governor General of India was changed to Viceroy of India, and the military and naval forces of East India Company was transferred to the crown. Okay, so this is the first important provisions of this particular act, and also the body of board of control as well as court of directors were abolished, and their powers were transferred to the Secretary of State. So the powers of board of control as well as court of directors was transferred to a new person called as Secretary of State. Now, this Secretary of State should sit in is a person who sits in British Parliament, and the Secretary of State has to be assisted by a body called as Council of Indian Affairs. Clear? So these are the provisions of Government of India Act 1858. Now, what is the significance of this particular Act 1858? See, the Queen's proclamation assured that the British princes that their territories will not be annexed by British government, and they shall be given their right to adopt. See, one of the main reasons for the outbreak of mutiny of 1857 is a lot of kings were dissatisfied with the aggressive territorial annexation policy followed by Lord Dalhousie. If you look at the policies pursued by Lord Dalhousie, he followed a policy called as Doctrine of Lapse. Now, based on this doctrine of lapse, kings who don't have natural heirs to their throne will be deprived of their kingdom. So now this caused a lot of discontent among Indian kings. Now this is one of the reasons for the outbreak of 1857 mutiny. Now to rectify that problem, Queen's proclamation assured to Indian princes that their territories will not be taken away by British government, and they will be given the right of adoption. The British government ordered its servants in India not to interfere into the religious affairs of Indian people. Clear? Also, one of the reasons for the outbreak of 1857 is the work done by Christian missionaries. Christian missionaries started to influence the decisions of Governor General, and they started to make laws for the propagation of Christianity. So this clearly interfered into the religious business of Indian people. This was also one of the reasons for the outbreak of mutiny. So the British government clearly ordered that the servants of India should not interfere into the religious affairs of Indian people. And also, importantly, for the first time, British subjects were treated on par with Indian subjects in judicial administration. Clear? Before this Queen's proclamation, British subjects were treated differently compared to Indian subjects. Clear? For the same crime, British subjects were given different punishment, and Indian subjects were given different punishment. Now, for the very first time, both British subjects as well as Indian subjects were treated on equal footing. So, rule of law was further strengthened. Now, even though Queen's proclamation was passed, a lot of provisions that is required for the administration of India was not mentioned in Queen's proclamation. Clear? The administrative apparatus which is required for managing this new India is not mentioned in Queen's proclamation. To rectify that problem, Indian Council Act of 1861 was passed. Clear? Now, what are the reasons why this act was passed? Indian Council Act of 1861 was the act of in British Parliament that made significant changes in Governor General's Council. Governor General was to be governed by was to be aided by his council. Now this act made some significant changes to Governor General's Council. The first and foremost reasons for the initiation of this policy was the realization on the part of British government that the great mistake on their part was not to provide institutions through which they should be in a position to know what the Indian thought about their rule. British Parliament thought that one of the major reasons for the outbreak of mutiny was they cannot judge the character of Indian people. They couldn't judge the mood of Indian people. To rectify that problem, they wanted to include more Indians in Executive Council. Now, moreover, it was also becoming increasingly difficult for Supreme Legislative Council to legislate for all provinces. As I mentioned before, Governor General of Bengal has to legislate for all of India. Now, Governor General had two types of bodies, Executive Council as well as Legislative Council. Now, the job of Legislative Council was becoming increasingly difficult for passing laws for all of India as well as provinces. So, to rectify all those problems, there are a number of provisions which was given in this act. Now, what are all the provisions in this act? Now, for the executive functions of the council, a fifth member was added, Now there were five members for whom military, law, revenue, and finance. Yeah. So there were five executive members. There are five executive members that was appointed. Now the Act restored the legislative powers of Governor General in Councils of Presidencies of Madras as well as Bombay, which was taken away by the Charter Act of 1833. Okay. If you watch my previous part, I would have mentioned in Charter Act of 1833 that Governor General of Bengal has the power to take away all the legislative powers of both Bombay as well as Madras. Now, this made Indian administration overly centralized. Now, Council Act of 1861 reversed this process. Now, Governor General in Council of both Bengal as well as Madras can make their own legislation. Now, Lord Canning, who was Governor General and Viceroy at the time, introduced a portfolio system. In this system, each member was assigned a portfolio of a particular department. It's kind of similar to how we are following Home Ministry, Finance Ministry in our current administration. Like this is also called as portfolio system. So a particular portfolio like health will be assigned to a particular executive council member, and the job of health education will be given to a particular minister. So this portfolio system was introduced for the very first time. For legislative purposes, the Governor General's Council was enlarged from 6 to 12. Now there are between 6 to 12 additional members nominated by Governor General. Now Lord Canning nominated three Indians to Council in 1862, namely Raja of Benares, Tamaraj of Patiala, as well as Sir Dinakar Rao. So for the very first time, Indians were included in the administration of Indian territories. So even though this representation of India is not based on popular vote, for the very first time, Indians were taken into consideration with respect to administration of Indian territories. Now, what is the significance of this particular act? Now, according to G.N. Singh, the Indian Council Act of 1861 marked importantly in constitutional history of India for two chief reasons. Firstly, because it enabled Governor General to associate people of the land to work in the work of legislation, and secondly, by vesting legislative powers in the governments of Bombay as well as Madras, and by making provisions, it laid the foundations of policy of legislative devolution, which resulted in the grant of utmost complete internal autonomy to provinces in 1937. So there are two types of significance in this Council Act of 1892. One significance is association of Indians in lawmaking, and the next one is legislative devolution. So this is the significance of Council Act of 1862. Clear? Now we'll move to the next constitutional development during British era, the Indian Council Act of 1892. Now the Act of 1861 failed to satisfy the progressive opinion in the country, which wanted to see these councils as instrument through which Indians could influence the decision of government. Now, if you look at the period between 1862 to 1892, one important landmark of Indian national movement happened during this period. That is establishment of Indian National Congress in 1885. Well, one of the major demand of Indian National Congress at the time was increased representation of India in Governor General's Council, so that these Indians can influence the decisions of Governor General. So that was a demand of Indian National Congress. So to appease these people, Indian Council Act was necessary. Clear? And also, European business magnates working in India, like tea planters of Assam and the big businessmen of Bombay, they were also in favor of increasing the number of elected members and enlargement of functions of this council in order to get representation for themselves on lawmaking bodies of India for furthering their own economic interest. Okay. Now, these business magnates wanted to enlarge Governor General's Executive Council as well as Legislative Council so that they can get themselves elected and influence their decisions of Governor General so that they can maximize their profits. Now, the Viceroy at the time, Lord Dufferin, set up a committee to look into this matter, but the Secretary of State did not agree to the plan of direct elections. He, however, agreed to the representation by the way of indirect election. See, Lord Dufferin set up a committee to look into the matter of having direct elections so that he can we can elect more Indians into law making as well as executive body. But Secretary of State was vehemently against that. But however, he approved the idea of having indirect election. Now, what are all the provisions of this particular act? Now, the act increased the number of additional as well as non-official members in legislative councils. And also, the members were given the right to ask questions on budget or matters of public interest. But before asking those questions, he has to give 6 days notice for asking those questions. And even after asking the question, he cannot ask any supplementary question. So this there were a lot of restrictions with respect to asking questions in legislative council. Now the principle of representation was limited through this act. So the principle of representation was initiated through this act. District boards, universities, municipalities, chambers of commerce, as well as zamindars were authorized to recommend members to provincial council. So now these people were empowered to make nominate members to provincial councils. The Legislative Council was also empowered to make new laws as well as repeal old laws with the permission of Governor General. So, Legislative Council on their own they are given power to pass new laws as well as repeal old laws, but on the permission of Governor General. Now, what is the significance of this particular act? See, it was the first step towards representative form of government in modern India, although there was nothing in it for common man. So, even though it marks for the first time the representation of common Indians in the government of administration of India, there was nothing in it for common man because common man is not having any influence over who gets represented. The number of Indians was increased, and this was a very positive step. However, since British conceded only a little, this act indirectly led to the rise of many revolutionary movements in India. See here, if you look at the developments of Indian National Congress during 1900s, Indian National Congress split into two groups called as moderates as well as extremists. Now, what are the core difference in ideology between moderates as well as extremists? See, extremists believe that British government was incapable of reform. So it is necessary for us to revolt against the government. But moderates believed in constitutional reforms by means of petition and slogans. Clear. So, since people passed British Parliament by means of Indian Council Act of 1882 passed only very little reform for British administration, this division became more apparent in the coming years. So that's why Indian National Congress split into these two groups, moderates as well as extremists. Now, many leaders like Bala Gangadhar Tilak blamed the Congress' moderate policy of petitions and persuasions for lack of positive developments and called for more aggressive policy against British rule. Clear? Now, after this Indian Council Act of 1882, Minto-Morley reforms was passed, also called as Indian Council Act of 1909. Now, this Minto-Morley reforms represented an attempt on the part of Government of India to meet the demand of moderates who were in a majority in the Congress. Clear? During 1906, Congress split into moderates as well as extremist faction. And the government wanted to appease this moderate faction so that more number of moderates will not join extremist factions. So they were extremely terrified of extremist faction. So they wanted to appease this moderate faction. So to appease this moderate faction, they wanted to throw in some constitutional reforms. The important cause of reforms appears to be anxiety on the part of government to save the Indian nationalists from passing into the hands of extremists. At that time, majority of Indian Congress was controlled by moderates. They wanted to prevent this transfer of power from moderates to extremists. So that's why they wanted to pass some constitutional reforms. And lastly, India was seething with discontent after the reign of Lord Curzon. Now, Lord Curzon followed some extremely dispopular policies like partition of Bengal, his clamp down on universities. All these policies were extremely unpopular among Indian masses who were severely wounded by his policies. Clear. Now, he also endured many Indian sentiments by his unwise utterances and had followed high-handed policies throughout his administration. So, because of that, Indians were seething with discontent. To appease Indians, the passing of Minto-Morley reforms was very essential by British Parliament. Now, what are all the provisions in Minto-Morley reforms? The first one is Legislative Council at centre as well as provinces was increased in size. Normal Indians were given membership to the Imperial Legislative Council for the very first time. Clear? Both Legislative Council in provinces as well as centre was increased. For the very first time, normal Indians were given membership into Legislative Council. Now, this act also introduced separate electorate for Muslims. Some constituencies were earmarked for Muslim representation only, and only Muslims could vote for their representatives. So, for the very first time, the policy of communal representation was followed by British government. Now, what is the reason why this communal representation was followed? Because of the establishment of Muslim League in 1906. So, Britain clearly they want to divide India on the basis of caste as well as religious lines. So that's why they favored communal politics when they were passing Minto-Morley reforms. Now the members could discuss the budget and move resolution against the budget. They could also discuss matters of public interest, and importantly, after asking those questions, they can also ask supplementary questions. But no discussions were allowed on foreign policy or in relations with princely states were permitted. Clear? Lord Minto appointed Satyendra P. Sinha as the very first Indian into Viceroy's Executive Council. So even though Indians were represented in Viceroy's Legislative Council right from Indian Council Act of 1862, for the very first time an Indian was appointed to Viceroy's Executive Council. Now this Indian is Satyendra P. Sinha. Now two Indians were nominated for Council of Secretary of State for the Indian Affairs. As I mentioned before, Secretary of State was assisted by a body called as Council of Indian Affairs. For the very first time, two Indians were nominated to this particular body. Now, what is the criticism of this particular act? Now, these reforms led to a lot of confusion. While parliamentary forms were introduced, no responsibility was given to both legislative as well as executive council. Now, the reforms introduced the system of elections, but the number of voters was very small. Even though this act introduced this concept called as direct elections, the electorate who can vote in these elections is very low. The electorate who can vote in this election is very low. Okay? So this particular information can be a prelims question. When was the first time direct election was introduced in direct election was introduced by British government? The answer is the Act of 1909. In Lakshmikant, they have mentioned that the Act is 1919, but that's clearly wrong. The direct election was introduced for the first time in Act of 1909, not Act of 1919. Now, the Act also introduced communal representation in Indian politics. This was intended to stem the growing tide of nationalism in the country by dividing people based on communal lines. Now, the culmination of this step was seen in the partition of the country along religious lines. The effects of differential treatment of different religious groups can be seen to this day. Now, because of this communal politics followed by British government, this communal politics culminated in partition of India. Now, this effect is felt even to this day. Now, what are the provisions introduced by Government of India Act 1919? After Act of 1909, Government of India Act 1919 was passed. It is also called as Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. Now, what are all the provisions of this particular Act 1919? Now, it introduced reforms both in central level as well as provincial level. Now, what are all the reforms that was carried out in provincial government? In executive, a principle called as diarchy was introduced. Now, under this diarchy, the Governor General will have two types of subjects. One is reserved subject, another one is transferred subject. Now, these are the two subjects which were classified. Now, this reserved subject was to be governed by a body called as Governor General's Executive Council. These transfer subjects will be governed by Legislative Council. So this transfer subjects will be governed by ministers. Clear? Reserve subjects will be governed by Governor General's executive councillors. These transfer subjects will be governed by ministers. Clear? Now, these executive councillors they were appointed by Governor General, but in case of ministers, they were nominated by a body called as Legislative Council, who were elected by people. So ministers they are responsible to people, but Governor General's executive council they are responsible to Governor General. So just by this their mode of responsibility, you can easily devise which subjects will go to executive councillor, which subjects will go to ministers. Executive councillors were given with the task of law and order. They were given subjects like law and order, irrigation, finance, land revenue, all these important subjects which are very important for revenue of British government. They were given to executive council who are responsible to governor of particular province. But these ministers they are responsible to people, so they were given uh, subjects like education, health, public works, industries. So these things are for developmental purpose. So the subjects that were concerned with development of Indian people, they were given to ministries. Subjects which is important for revenue of British government, they were given to executive council. Clear? As I mentioned before, these ministers they are responsible to people as they are elected, who is elected through legislature. These ministers were nominated among elected members of legislative council. These executive council are not responsible to legislature. Unlike minister, these executive councillors are responsible to governor. Now, Secretary of State as well as Governor General could interfere into the matters under reserved list, but this interference was restricted in the matters of transferred list. So, in matters concerned with reserved list like law and order, land revenue, in these subjects, the Secretary of State as well as Governor General of India they can interfere, but in matters concerned with transferred list like education, health as well as industries, their interference is restricted. Now, what are the reforms introduced in legislature? Now, the size of provincial legislative assemblies was increased. Now, about 70 percentage of members were elected. So, out of, for example, if a legislative council had 100 members, out of these 100 members, 70 members were elected, other 30 members were nominated. Now, these nominated members will be nominated by Governor General, Zamindars, universities, as well as princes. All these people can nominate for these 30 members. There were communal as well as class electorates even in provincial levels. Some women were given the right to vote. The governor's assent was required to pass any bill. He also had any veto power over issue of ordinances also. So even though a legislative council can pass laws concerned for the development of Indians, any law passed by the legislative council of provinces can be struck down by Governor General of that particular province. Now, what are the reforms that was passed in central government? Executive. In what are the reforms necessitated in executive sphere? Now, the chief executive authority was Governor General. Now, there are two lists of administration, central as well as provincial. Just like how our constitution divides subjects into union list, state list as well as concurrent list, even in 19 Act of 1919, subjects were divided into central list as well as provincial list. This central list were to be controlled by central government. Matters under provincial list will be governed by provinces. So for the first time, a type of federation with unitary bias was introduced in Council Act of 1919. Okay. Now the provincial list was under the provinces while centre took care of central list. So out of 6 members of Viceroy's Executive Council, 3 were to be Indian members. So as I mentioned before, Viceroys had two types of council, Executive Council as well as Legislative Council. Now this Executive Council, there were 6 members. Out of the 6 members, 3 were to be British and 3 were to be Indians. And also, Governor General is empowered to issue ordinances. Also, he could certify bills that were rejected by central legislature. If a Governor General wants to pass a certain type of legislation, he will introduce that particular law in Legislative Council, and Legislative Council has to approve it. Even though if Legislative Council is were to rejecting it, Governor General has the power to override the will of the central legislature. For example, a Rowlatt Act. Now, this act was rejected by Legislative Council. So, even though this act was rejected by Legislative Council, Governor General overrid the decision of central legislature and he passed this act nonetheless. Now, what are the reforms that was established in Legislature of India? For the first time, a bicameral legislature was established. Two types of legislatures were established, called as Legislative Assembly as well as Council of State. So, for the first time, bicameral legislature was established. Clear? Now, these are forerunners to both Lok Sabha as well as Rajya Sabha. Hmm? Now, what are all the merits of Government of India Act 1919? Diarchy introduced the concept of responsible government. Clear? In diarchy, there is supposed to be transfer subjects. Now, these transfer subjects will be administered by ministers. These ministers are responsible to people of India. So, for the first time, it introduced the concept of responsible government. It introduced the concept of federal structure with unitary bias. There was increased participation of Indians in administration. They held some portfolios like labor, health, and certain other portfolios, etc. For the first time, elections were known to people and it created political consciousness among the people of India. So, for the first time, Indians were allowed to take part in elections. So, it created a kind of political consciousness among people of India. And also, for the first time, some Indian also had right to vote for the very first time. So even before right to vote was given to countries like USA, Canada, right to vote for women was given to Indian women. Now, what are all the limitations of Government of India Act 1919? Now, this act extended consolidated and communal representation. See, before that of 1919, the communal representation was introduced. Now, this act consolidated as well as extended communal representation. The franchise for vote was very limited. It did not extend to common man. So, even though people were allowed to vote, the franchise was still very limited in nature. Now, the Governor General and the governors had a lot of power to undermine the legislature at the center as well as provinces. So, even though Legislative Council had the power to pass legislation for the betterment of Indian, the Governor General had the power to override the will of both the legislatures. Now, the allocation of seats for central legislature was not based on population but the importance to the province in the eyes of British. See, there was. Wait here, now there was Legislative Assembly in center as well as Council of States. Now, seats in Legislative Council will be divided to number of provinces. Now, the seats allocated to different provinces was not based on population, but rather based on importance to British government. So, lot of seats were given to three provinces, namely Bombay, Madras, as well as Bengal. So, even though population was higher in other areas, more representation was given to these three provinces. Okay. Now, the Rowlatt Acts was passed in 1919, which was severely restricted the press as well as movement of Indians. Despite the unanimous opposition of Indian members of Legislative Council, those bills were passed. Several Indian members resigned as a sign of protest of passing Rowlatt Act. As I mentioned before, one of the provisions of Government of India Act 1918 was Governor General is empowered to override the will of Legislative Assembly. So even though Rowlatt Act was opposed as well as rejected by Legislative Assembly, this act was passed by Governor General of India. Now, after the passing of Governor General Indian Council Act 1919, Government of India Act of 1935 was passed by British Parliament. Now, what are the reasons why this particular act was passed? We will look into that in this slide. Now, there was a growing demand for constitutional reforms in India by Indian leaders. This is obvious. Now, the next one is India's support in Britain's First World War was also aided in British acknowledgement that the need of inclusion of more Indians in administration of their own country. One of the reasons of victory of Britain over Germany in First World War is inclusion of Indians in war efforts and also approval given by Indian national leaders. Yeah. Now there was at that time in 1935 there was a brewing war between Britain as well as Germany. Now Britain was desperate for approval from Indian leaders So they wanted to pass some reform so that they can be well equipped to recruit more Indians for their war efforts. And also, this act was based on number of recommendations given by number of reports like Simon Commission report, recommendations of roundtable conferences. Now, the roundtable conferences had three types of roundtable conferences: first, second, as well as third. In third roundtable conferences, a white paper was published by British Parliament, British government. Now, based on this white report, Government of India Act 1935 was passed, and also based on reports by joint select committees, which was appointed by Governor General's legislative assemblies. Now, what are all the provisions of Government of India Act 1935? So, for the first time, it created a body called as All India Federation. Now, this federation was to consist of British India along with princely states. Now, the provinces in India were automatically included in All India Federation, but the choice was given to princely states whether to join All India Federation or not. So, it was the choice of princely states kings whether if they want to join princely states or not. Now, the federation was never materialized because of lack of support from princely states. So, because this was a choice, no princely state was willing to join All India Federation. Now, how Government of India Act 1935 divided powers? Now, this act divided powers between center as well as provinces. Now, how this power was divided? Now, according to Government of India Act 1935, subjects were divided into three subjects. One is federal list, provincial list, as well as concurrent list. Now, this is similar to division of power in Constitution of India, like union list, state list, as well as concurrent list. So, this division of subjects under Constitution of India was clearly inspired from Government of India Act 1935, but there is a crucial difference. In case of Government of India Act 1935, a viceroy was vested with residual powers, but in case of Constitution of India, the residual powers is vested with Parliament of India. Clear? Now, what are the other provisions in Government of India Act 1935? The first one is provincial autonomy. The Act gave more autonomous powers to provinces. Even though certain autonomous powers was given to provinces, this Act granted full autonomy. Now, the diarchy was abolished in provincial levels. Governor was the head of executive. There was a council of ministers to advise him. These ministers were responsible to provincial legislature who controlled them. The legislature could also remove these ministers. So, for the first time, a similar type concept called as parliament was introduced in provincial legislature. So, before in Act of 1919, there were two types of ministers, two types of executive called as executive councillors as well as ministers, right? Now, these executive councillors were abolished. Now, only ministers were to advise Governor General. Now, these ministers were nominated by a body called as provincial legislative assemblies. Now, these provincial legislative assemblies members were elected by people of India. So, the act of responsible government was furthered. However, governor still retained some special reserve powers. So, even though number of subjects that was given to ministries was expanded, some provisions was reserved for governor. British authorities could still suspend provincial government. Now, this provision is similar to emergency provisions in Constitution of India. Clear? If Governor General Viceroy felt that any British province is not being ruled properly, they can suspend that particular provincial government. Now, importantly, even though diarchy was abolished in state level, diarchy was introduced in central level. In central level, the subjects were divided into federal list. The federal list was divided into two lists, reserved as well as transferred. The reserved subjects will be controlled by Governor General, who administered them with the help of councillors who were nominated by Governor General. Clear? Now, they are not these councillors as well as Governor General. They are not responsible to legislature. They held important portfolios like defense, ecclesiastical affairs, external affairs, press, police, taxation, justice, power resources, as well as tribal affairs. So, under this reserve list, they held some important provisions like external affairs, press, police. All these subjects came under reserved list. Now, what subjects came under transferred list? Now, transferred subjects were administered by Governor General with the help of Council of Ministers. Now, this Ministers should not be more than 10 members. Now, the Council of Ministers should act in the confidence of legislature. The subjects in this list included government, forests, education, health, and some other welfare provisions. However, Governor General had special powers to interfere in the transfer subjects also. So, even though transfer subjects were given to ministers, still Governor General can interfere into the process of transfer subjects. Now, what are the reforms that was introduced in legislative sphere? A bicameral legislature was established in provincial level also. Clear? Both provincial level as well as central government level. In central government level, two houses were established: Federal Assembly as well as Council of States. So in a way, they have renamed Legislative Assembly into Federal Assembly. Now, Federal Court was established for the first time. Now, this Federal Court was established in Delhi for the resolution of disputes between provinces as well as center and between provinces. Okay. So, for the very first time, a Federal Court was established in Delhi. It should have one Chief Justice and not more than 6 judges. And also, Indian Council was abolished. The Secretary of State of India would instead have a team of advisors. As I mentioned before, Secretary of State will be advised by a body called as Council of Indian Affairs. Now, this Council of Indian Affairs was abolished. Instead, he will advise by a team of advisors. So now these are the constitutional developments that happened between British government during the period of 1757 to 1935. Now these topics are very important not only from prelims perspective but also important from mains perspective. Questions can be asked from mains perspective also. Yeah. So learning this topic is very important for you. Now I hope everything that I have taught you in this class was very clear and informative for you. If you have any doubts with regards to the topics that I have taught today, you can ask in the comment section below. And if you like this video, don't forget to like, share as well as comment on this particular video. And if you want to get access to more videos like this particular class, subscribe to Unacademy, and don't forget to subscribe to Unacademy Plus subscription if you want to study further. Okay? Thank you and have a nice day. Stay home and stay healthy.